Hey, hey, this is Helen with Porla and Pine. Sometimes I feel like life is a big, endless to-do list. It's not only about work, but there's always so many things that needs to get done in your personal life too, and it seems impossible to catch up. Do you ever feel that? Let's see what Nick has to say about this. Nick is one of those people who has multiple businesses and like 3,000 projects going on at the same time. And I asked her if we could have a little talk about stress and to do lists because I thought maybe she has some good tips. Professionally, Nick goes by J Nichole Smith, but I call her Nick, and you can too. Her career began in the pet industry in 2005 because of a Great Dane named Olivia. She co founded Dog is Good, a lifestyle brand for dog lovers. In 2012, she followed love to London. She lives there now with her husband, who is also an entrepreneur, and their Frenchie puppy Pippa. She has a master in marketing from one of London's top business schools. Nick speaks about branding and entrepreneurship at events in the US and the UK. She's currently working on her third book, all about the art, science, and magic of how to build a great business while also becoming a happier human. Also, she is the person who helped me find my why, what is now Porla and Pine. I told her from the very beginning that I'm not doing this without her by my side. So for the last, 2 years, she's been mentoring me through this life-changing journey. And here we are. Hello, Nick, and thank you so much for taking your time out of your very busy schedule to talk about busy schedules. How are you today?
Thank you for having me, Helen. I'm really well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really excited about this new chapter for Portland and Pine.
Yay, we both are.
Yeah.
So I know that you're involved in like no less than four businesses. Dog is Good, working with dog, Animal House, and then you're consulting, speaking, and book writing. Like, how do you do it all?
That's a great question. And I think maybe a better question is why do I do it all? Um, well, I guess these days I really just try not to overthink it. I just start stuff and then figure it out as I go. So I'm a bit of a recovering perfectionist, and it still haunts me, but trying to be a little bit more swift and like a little less obsessive about the things that slow me down. And really, the short answer is I have a team. Like, I'm finally at a point where I've grown past what I can physically do by myself. So I really need them. I totally rely on the people around me who make it all happen.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
It's good. It's good.
So tell me a little bit about that perfectionism you touched on there, because I think a lot of us can relate to that. How did you like get better at not being a perfectionist? I assume it's like an ongoing work, but
Yeah, I'm not sure you're ever cured of being a perfectionist, but that's a great question. I think I read, Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic.
oh yes.
In there, she has this great quote about how perfectionism is just the haute couture version of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And that really struck me. And I realized that it was super true, and that like pretty much all perfectionism is about not being good enough. And like, that's going to be true whether it takes you a week to get it done or a year or you never get it done. Like, you're always going to feel like it's never good enough. So I've tried to just practice, like, what if it is good enough, and just trying to get things done and out there, because otherwise I just get so paralyzed. And it is a practice. I think it's like a muscle that you have to strengthen, just being okay with putting things out into the world when they're not perfect.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, yeah, that's the scariest thing. And but that's you said something so good there that it's never going to be good enough like for us perfectionists, right? You always can do a little better and a little better and it just goes on.
Exactly. Yeah, and the other thing that's actually really helped is that team I mentioned, like, they rely on me to get shit done. Like, they need stuff from me, and I need to be able to get it to them. So, at some point I have to just ship it. And the other thing is delegating, like being able to just hand stuff off and being like, you know what? It's so much better to have it done and for me to not have to do it than to like micromanage everything and make sure that everything is exactly the way that I would do it. So
Mm-hmm.
that like evolving from being a one person business to a multiple person business kind of solves it for you a little bit, because otherwise you're just a really horrible boss.
Yep. No, I hear
Yeah.
you. I know
Yep.
that's like. So, in terms of time, having so many projects and so many things going on, because I'm thinking too, you have a puppy, I know you travel a lot. Like, how do you manage your time? Do you have any tips for our listeners?
This is really interesting because I've been working a lot on this for the community I have online. We're doing a whole month on productivity and a time management challenge, actually. So this is like really fresh for me right now. And what's really interesting is that I've realized that time management in particular has actually kind of been one of those things that's like those deep, dark, shameful corners that you don't want to go into.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like another bad habit that I'm working on recovering from, is this idea of like managing time pretty badly. So like I've had sort of chronic lateness and super bad procrastination my whole life, which to be fair, I came by a little bit honestly from my mom. Thanks, mom. But I realized this is another one of those things that just comes down to this not enoughness thing where it's, you know, complicated and there's lots of layers to it, but that's how I kind of identified, you know, that this ability to like never be on time or like wait till the last minute was all based on this same feeling. And now that I've kind of identified that and really kind of brought it into the light, it makes it easier to make different choices and just say like, how would it feel to have something done on time? How would it feel to be early? How would it feel? And like, to be honest, the place I started was how much time I allow at the airport because I find the stress of racing through an airport like just way, way too much. So I started arriving like 2.5 hours early instead of like barely an hour.
Yep.
And I love it because now it's like this ritual I have where I go early and I have a meal and I do some shopping and it feels so like light and it makes traveling way more fun. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to just sort of apply that same thing to other areas of my life, basically.
That is so awesome. It's funny because my husband oftentimes says that too. He's like, Helen, like you just can't be too early, can you? Because no, I have to finish what I'm doing, and then I feel like if you're too early, it's a waste of time. Then I have time there that I'm just early. What should I
Yes.
do with this time? So, but the airport example
Yes.
is a good, it's a good, give me a
And
good visual.
totally. And what I really found digging into that, like, well, what happens if I was early? I found two really sticky things there. And I don't know if this is the same for you, but this was my sort of realization. One is that if I'm early, then I'm the one waiting. And there's something about that that like reeks of rejection, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
it? Like you're the one who's like not, you're not busy enough or you're not popular enough, or like there's something in there that's definitely about like not wanting to be the one waiting. And then the other thing I realized was that other piece you're mentioning about trying to squeeze just that last little bit in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the way I've been getting over that one is I'm like, that's okay. I can squeeze that in, but I'm going to do it when I get there. So I like take my laptop, arrive like 20 minutes early. I have some time for a coffee and like to get the last thing done. And then I'm like centered and I'm not like red faced and sweating, rushing in from running from the car, like never a good look.
So, what would you say is in your personal toolbox to fight the feeling of stress and overwhelm? That inner, I'm sure you can relate to that. You just feel this
Oh.
inner yuckiness, right?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I have a lot of the same go-tos that I imagine you probably do. Water, like hot bath, being in warm water is like everything.
Mm-hmm.
I need that like every day. And I used to feel really guilty about taking a bath because I'm like, oh, it's such a waste of water. But again, that's not enough water, not, like, so I'm like, I can have as many baths as I want. And because I live in London and we have this house that was built in like the 1800s, it's super drafty and cold in the winter. So sometimes it's like the only way I can actually get warm.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
I take a lot of baths for sure. the other thing is that I'm on this journey right now of trying to find like to try and work through a ton of different like modalities of like sort of natural healing and stuff. So I'm trying like Chinese medicine and
Mm.
acupressure and chiropractic and just looking at all these different ways to kind of see what I like and what works for me and what makes me feel good and what freaks me out. Like, see if anything works at all. And one thing I've always loved there is massage. Like I've always really relied heavily on massage because I think it's great physically. Obviously, it's good for blood flow and the muscles and all that, but I think it's also really good mentally to have that space where there's no screen, there's no person,
Mm-hmm.
there's no anything, but you're not really asleep either. So it's like this sort of meditative state that I think is really healthy that I just don't get ever in my life. And it's kind of the same with being in a hot bath as long as I don't take in a phone, right?
Yeah, true. Yes.
Um, and I think actually the big thing here is that there's two like big awarenesses I've had about this recently as well. One is that my like the inability to engage in these sort of self-care rituals
Mm-hmm.
was like it wasn't about not having enough time. It wasn't about like it was really about almost like punishment. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't deserve it because I didn't accomplish enough or
Yes.
like all of that. Oh God. And how horrible is that? Like
Yes.
what does a person have to do to deserve a bath, you know?
Uh-huh. I can so relate to that.
My God. So one of the things I've been working on is, which has been kind of a change, is giving myself permission to do these things without guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the way that I've done that is I actually know now I have like empirical evidence that says when I do these things, I get back on my feet faster.
Oh.
And so I'm like, actually, this is really good for peak performance because if I give myself this afternoon or this bath or whatever, tomorrow I'm going to be like right back on it and excited and energized instead of like, I'll get back into flow faster if I take that time instead of forcing myself through more work and then still being crappy the next day.
Mm-hmm. So you somehow turned it into like a productive thing anyway.
Yeah, yeah, right. There has to be yeah, I know. It's terrible, isn't it? We're the
No,
worst.
I totally hear you. I'm the same. I can so relate to all of that. And I think it's funny too because I find that when you take a warm bath or you go to a massage, it's like the body has to give in. You don't have a
Mm.
choice. The heat and like the action of the massage, it just kind of the stress floats away because it physically has to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I hear you about the but it's good though. Whatever makes you do it, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah, to be honest, because then it just changes your mindset so much that you're in such a better place.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so, do you have any tips for our listeners? Like you kind of mentioned the massage already and the bath, but are there any other ways that you take care of yourself to kind of, I know that you're big into rewards, which you have taught me a lot about that, and I've never used to reward myself for anything. But do you have any tips for how people can actually do a little more self-care or explore that area a little bit?
Yes, definitely. So, one of the things I kind of touched on already is this idea of punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things that I've kind of come to learn is that we can do all the self care rituals we want, but if we fundamentally don't believe that we deserve them,
Mm-hmm.
they're not nearly as effective. So, sort of as a long term strategy, I'd say really starting to dig into that whole monster.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the ways to kind of avoid that for a while, if you're not quite ready, is to really look at fun and play
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like and a piece of this that I think is really kind of interesting to dig into is pleasure because one of the things that I've kind of learned in my research is that and in my life actually to be fair in real life is that we all really want to be comfortable, right? We work really hard to like avoid pain and discomfort and like being
Mm-hmm.
awkward and all those things. um, but unfortunately all the good stuff is on the other side of being uncomfortable. So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is really really valuable. And the problem with that is that being uncomfortable really sucks. And you can only do it for so much. And you think you really need you need something on the other side of that discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And so the things that I've been exploring are like this idea of fun and play and also pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like we're so pleasure starved. Like,
Yeah.
we're not told to seek pleasure. And I mean, that sounds like really sexy the way I'm saying it, but like, but I mean, and that's actually part of it, but like actual just fun and
Yeah.
like things you do just for the pleasure of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I've lived most of my life pretty much avoiding that.
Yes.
Like,
Oh, totally.
I'm gonna do things that are practical and things I have to do, and like, but fun has never really factored in. And this is something my husband actually brought into my life, because he's like a guy who's always turning everything into a game, and he's always like got a ball that he's like throwing around, and everything's fun for him. And at first I used to get really annoyed because I'm like, can you like do some chores with me? Or like, it's Saturday and we have a house to clean. What are you doing? You know? Um, but I'm starting to try and teach myself how to make time for that. And what I've realized makes that easier is by actually acknowledging that it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And actually like turning it into something I put energy and attention towards, instead of just like empty space. So like if you have empty space on a Saturday, you're going to work or clean or nap or whatever. But if you actually put some effort into like what would be fun, like what would I be into? So for me, I've kind of discovered some stuff that I thought was fun when I was a kid, like being around horses, horseback riding, a little bit of gardening, playing like board games and cards, like actual
Oh, how
games. Oh
fun.
my God.
That's awesome.
So that stuff is kind of cool. And then the other thing that's kind of surprised me is I actually really enjoy cooking, which I am like, if someone could just feed me all my meals every day, I'd be super like stoked about that. But actually, if you cook with like aromatic herbs and like colorful vegetables and stuff, it can be like an occasion. It's like fun.
Yeah, and very relaxing too, as you said, both fun and relaxing. There's something kind of meditative about it almost.
Totally. Yeah. So those are things I've been exploring, but I would say as far as advice for your listeners, it would be to like really ask yourself, like, what do I think is fun? Like actually fun, actively fun, not just like the absence of stress, but like
Hmm.
fun, pleasurable, and try and actually schedule some more of that into your life, because it's not going to happen by accident.
No. And I think it's key what you said initially there, that you thought back to what did I enjoy when I was a kid? Because oftentimes I think that that's where we start. How should I put it? We kind of leave that somehow along the way of becoming adults, and that's where
Mhm.
that you can reconnect to that joy. Is what did we like to do when we were younger? It was just more pure somehow. You know what I mean?
Totally. And some of that won't translate well. Like I built a lot of forts, and I'm
Sure.
probably not going to do that now. But the thing that is kind of like sad about that as well is just realizing that I was like an only child and my parents worked a lot. And
Hmm.
so I spend a lot of time being alone. And that's partly what I find fun is like being in my own world. And that's partly why I chose like photography and graphic design in the early parts of my career, is that those were activities that I found fun that I could do by myself. And
Hmm.
so actively looking for things that are fun with other people as well is, I
Yeah.
think, really rewarding, because we feed off that connection so much. And it's so easy to just put, those, not have a game night or a barbecue with friends, because it's like, oh, I have to clean the house or like buy groceries or whatever.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The house is not clean. Like it's hard to be spontaneous because you set out all those perfection rules.
Not enough, not enough, not
Yep.
enough. Yeah. Yep.
I love all that. And I really hope that the people that are listening right now are gonna kind of, yeah, try to play and start paying attention to it, because I think also we live in, or most of us live in, this developed first world kind of, we live in the first world kind of thing. And so it's just, we think that we have it all, but there is something missing, I think, on a spiritual level almost. And that's what you
Mm.
were just talking about, the play, the joy, where you dig just a little deeper. It's not about just having food on the table and have access to all the shopping and food. Like, you know what I mean? Like, all the entertainment and
Yeah.
Facebook and social media and all that stuff, but it's digging a little deeper. Um,
Totally. And that, like, part of the research I'm doing right now is for my book. I'm diving so deep deeply in right now to what makes humans happy.
Ooh.
And it's it's really interesting and pretty obvious actually. Like it's like,
Uh-huh.
duh, of course these things make us happy, like connection with other humans
Mm-hmm.
and like feeling like we're giving back. And so what's really interesting, and this is like obviously a whole different, deeply philosophical conversation, but like most like the constructs that we live in right now are pretty much the opposite of what actually makes us happy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have to like spend all our time like living in this, like you say, in this first world where we shop and buy things for pleasure and eat more food that our body rejects and all this stuff, and then figure out in our off time like why we're so miserable. Like,
Yeah, isn't that
um,
interesting, huh?
yeah, it's kind of it's kind of funny. I mean, it's tragic, but it's kind of funny that we've just missed the point so much. And little things like, I don't know if you have this experience, like when, I know you walk your dogs on the beach and stuff like that, but
Mm-hmm.
just physically being out, even if you're not like in nature, you're still among people or you're in an urban environment, but you can actually feel like air, like wind or like sunshine on your skin.
Yes.
It's like
Oh, totally.
there's something deeply human about that, right? And when we're sat in front of a screen in our room, like we just, I don't know, I feel like I sound so cliche, like saying all this stuff, but it's true,
No.
like hard to read all these books about what makes people happy and then like be like, I think I'm gonna sit for 12 hours a day and stare at a screen and like that'll do the trick.
Right? Nope. It's funny that you mentioned that though, because that's part of Portland Pine too, and something that I would like to dig deeper into is to see how nature and outdoors can actually bring us more peace, and how we kind of have to reconnect to that a bit instead of just spending all this time in front of the screens. I mean, we obviously have to be in front of the screens for work and other things, but take moments also to use nature and be in nature to reconnect.
Yes. And there's so much great research on that as well about, sort of what it does to our biochemistry and stuff to be in nature. And what's really funny about that is that I've never really considered myself like a nature person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am obsessed with being near the sea and having like my feet in the sand. But other than that, I'm not an outdoorsy, hikery. I mean, I like these things, but they're not things that I would like define my personality around. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that like the more I like go through this journey of like this whole happiness thing and this like self-worth thing and enoughness, all that, I I crave it more. Like,
Oh.
so I think there's some level of like getting back to the basics that really makes you kind of get in tune, I guess a bit like you would with food or anything else when you start stripping away all the nonsense,
Yeah.
that you start really to kind of crave the right stuff. And so I mean, also I live in England, which is like devoid of sunshine. So the fact that I like crave vitamin D is probably not a surprise. There's also that.
Oh yeah, but no, I totally see what you're saying, and I think there's so much truth to that. And I also think that we're gonna see more and more of that. Like people are
Yeah.
gonna, especially as you said, if you just start trying it out a little bit, and I've experienced that with food in particular, where the other stuff doesn't taste as good now. Like I
I
feel like
know
this
it's
is
horrible,
artificial.
right? You stop
Yes.
eating sugar and all of a sudden you don't want it. Ah!
Exactly, exactly. And it's like, yeah,
Yep.
this is not like a real tomato sauce. This is a lot of chemicals and stuff in it. You know what I mean? And I think it's the
Yeah.
same with just being in front of screens and not, being connected, that if you get a little taste of what it can be not to be like that, maybe that will make you crave more.
Yeah, and I think that's partly why we don't do it because we're kind of afraid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're comfortable functioning right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yep.
And if we like tap into like, oh, but what if I don't eat sugar? How awkward is that going to be at, birthday time? Or like, what if
Mm-hmm.
I need to stand up every 2 hours? That's going to be awkward at work. And like, we start to think about like all the ways like being happier and healthier are going to be inconvenient. And we're like, nah, I'll just leave it.
Yeah.
Too
Oh, that's
much.
funny.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, despite all your successes and all the stuff that you've been doing and accomplishing, I'm sure like all of us that you run into like frustration and self-doubt every now and then. Let's talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that. Like, what do you do when that happens?
Um, well, one of the things that I realized happens, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but I know you talk a lot about wellness and stuff. So I imagine
Mm-hmm.
it's something you're tapped into, but I started to realize how much stress comes out in like physical manifestations in my actual body.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like in my skin. I don't know, I've like given myself hives and rashes and all kinds of things. And so that was a real deterrent for me in terms of like figuring out other ways to process things like anger and frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think having some coping mechanisms, which, is really important. I think my coping mechanisms in the past were just to be like not mad or like
Mm-hmm.
just numbing, right?
Yep.
Like it's fine. It doesn't matter. It's fine.
Push it down.
And
Push it down.
yeah, yeah. And lately I've had like in the last 6 months or so, I've kind of been working on that. And I've been really sad and I've been really mad. And the reality is, if you just feel it,
Mm-hmm.
like it kind of goes. um, but one of the things is to do some fact checking because I feel like we need to sanity check ourselves. And one of the things I use a lot is when I'm, especially in in like those not enough spirals where you're like super late or like you feel really gross in whatever you're wearing or super mad that you're like not doing more or whatever, like those
Yeah.
like really icky ones. Like I've been practicing just like this what if
Mm-hmm.
question of like when I'm feeling that just like rage of like, that feeling when it happens and you can like at least put a pin in it at the moment and be
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is that thing that's
Yep.
really ugly. Okay, I can identify that this is that thing. And then I've just started asking myself this basic question because it applies to basically everything, which is what if it's okay?
Mm-hmm.
What if I'm enough? What if it's enough to just show up?
Mm-hmm.
And I find this happens to me a lot when I'm getting ready to leave the house and I'm worried about going somewhere or being something or performing or like, being with people who trigger me or whatever. And like they're so this and I'm so this, like,
Mm-hmm.
so I've gotten in the habit of just stopping myself and being like, what if showing up and being me and being present and being all there and like not distracted by all this shit that's going through my head, what if that is enough?
Yeah.
And, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's like, ah,
Mm-hmm.
but stopping long enough to act like just to ask the question really cuts that whole shame spiral in half. And it
Yeah.
really makes you kind of at least consider the fact that what this is about is not what you're actually thinking that it's about at the moment. And you're like, all right, I'm just going to chuck on some shoes and get out the door. So that what if question, I think, is really helpful,
Oh, that
at least
is,
for me.
yeah, that is so powerful. Sorry for interrupting you. I was just like, oh my gosh, yes, yes. What a concept. You can just be enough the way you are, right?
It takes some getting used to, and it's never like what you want to hear at the time, right?
Of
And
course.
and sometimes you can't do it, like sometimes you're just going to have to rage it out a little bit. But I think what it does really is help you focus on how much this is not about what everybody else thinks of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your like fear and paranoia about what they might think of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's where all this stuff comes from. And like, it's all this unnecessary like energy. It's just like, what if they don't know or think any of this stuff that I'm imagining? And it's enough for me to just go be happy and like be there. Like, that's probably what they actually want from me right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I think too that we give people so much credit. Like all of us are busy with our lives. Most people don't pay so much attention, to be honest.
Yeah. Yep.
And then if there's someone that has a problem with something like that doesn't hurt anyone else, obviously, but what does that person mean to us anyway? You know what I mean? What does it
Mm.
really matter?
Who actually cares?
Yeah, who
Yeah.
actually cares?
I love, I don't know, have you read the book, The Four Agreements?
Yes, a long time ago. I remember loving it. I should
Yeah.
reread it actually.
It's really good. And I'm trying to reread it right now. And it's funny because I don't remember it being like this. It's like harder to get through the second time. I don't know why, but it's weird. It's weird, but I love it. And this idea of one of the agreements is that you don't take anything personally.
Mm-hmm.
And the bit that like really stuck out for me was there's this quote in there, I think, about even at the point where someone's pointing a gun at your head, it's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah.
And that's really stuck with me. And it's especially been good. I've had all kinds of conflicts I've had to wade through in all these businesses and lawsuits and all kinds of ugly stuff and situations where it's really, really, really hard not to be super defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you're dealing with like legal stuff and you don't get a chance to defend yourself when someone's like blatantly out and out lying about you. Like there's situations where it's just like so hard not to fight.
Of course.
And this idea I think is so helpful because it's just like, it's not about me. Like, I don't need to defend myself. I don't need to even engage in this conversation or give it another thought because this isn't about me. It's about them. And I just don't care. Like,
yeah.
It's really, really liberating.
That is so awesome. Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely need to read that book again, it sounds like, but yeah.
Yeah, and also just this idea of not taking things personally. I think a lot of us really jump immediately to what, to this foregone conclusion about what someone must think or like their motivations, which must be malicious, and it's just like, it's not, it's about them. Like they're in their own bubble. You're in your own bubble. I'm in my own bubble. And
totally.
It's not about them. It's about, it's not about, it's just, they don't really care about you at all.
Seriously, I think that's really what it is. And again, if they do, does it really matter? And I used to I worked with this guy that many years ago on a boat in the archipelago. I can never say that word properly, but you know what I mean. And so, and he was a captain. He had this goal. He was gonna save up like to 1 million Swedish crowns to buy his own yacht and start his own company. And now he was just an employee at this smaller boat or whatever. And so I remember one of the things, we had a lot of interesting discussions going back and forth there among the little islands, And so he said, Helen, because he had a lot of people like, what are you doing? That's crazy. And he was sleeping in the cellar of 7-Eleven. He had like double jobs to try and save up all this money. And people were just like, oh my gosh, you're never going to do this kind of thing. And he was just like, I've learned not to care. And I've learned not to care about what people say if it's that they're trying to discourage me. Like, I mean, this goes in a little bit about performance, I guess, but I think it can apply to other areas in life too. But he said, I'm only listening to those people that are going to support me, and I'm using that as my fuel. And by the way, who cares in 100 years, Helen? Who cares in 100 years? Just think about that. And I was like, interesting. And that who cares in 100 years have really stuck with me. And when you start obsessing about tiny little things in life, I oftentimes think on that, like, yeah, who cares in 100 years? Like, we're going to be gone and no one like care that I had a hole in my jean. I don't know. I mean, that was a bad example, but you know what I mean? It's like my hair was greasy that day when I met this client in the grocery store or whatever. Who cares in 100 years? It just puts it in perspective. But
and even in your own life, like, will you even remember this in 10 years time? Like, do we actually care? I think, we spend so much extra energy, don't we, like investing in this stuff, and it's just like, think of all the other things you could be doing with that energy.
Oh yeah, because it's all about that energy, really.
It's
time and energy. So you have also worked, or you are working and have worked and interviewed so many different brands and companies, entrepreneurs and bigger and smaller and, you name it. But what are the things that you have learned from them when it comes to trying to juggle hard work with personal life? Kind of going back a little bit to that busy to-do list.
Ooh, what have I learned from them? I think the biggest sort of takeaway is that the thing that works for one person doesn't work for everyone. And this has been really interesting, like having a community of people as well, is that one person can absolutely swear by something and someone else, it just absolutely doesn't work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into these like horrible guilt spirals about like not doing it right. It's like, wait, what? um, and so I think, there's two pieces of that. One is like figuring out what works for you and not fighting it. So like an
Mm-hmm.
example of this for me recently is I'm always like trying to get really good at using an app like Trello or like some sort of workflow app where I can keep everything super organized and it can be all color coded. And the reality for me is I need paper. I need
Mm-hmm.
clipboards and paper, and that's my system.
Yep.
And like I've figured it out now because I can just take pictures of it with my phone and upload it to Drive and my team can see it. But it's so much faster and more cathartic and easier for me to just draw it on paper.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I get all caught up in the tech of it. And it's not because I'm a technophobe, like I'm not, but I've spent so many years fighting against my urge to use real paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I've given up. Like I'm notebooks and clipboards now. And even when I'm like traveling, I've always got a clipboard with me because there's something about having a whole stack of white paper as much as I need and being able to shift the order of it, not being like held down in a notebook,
Yep.
that like it just works for me. And now that I've got that, I've got a system and it works. And I've got this wall of clipboards in my office and they all mean something to me and I know where
Mm-hmm.
to find things. So that like figuring out what works for you and just letting it be okay. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
fine. Whatever works for you works and just go with it. Um, I think is really helpful. And then the other piece of that is kind of looking at things instead of in these like short bursts of looking a little bit more long term and really thinking about things in the context of like habits and practices rather than I need to do this thing and I need to do this thing and I need to do this other individual thing. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's not actually true. Like you need to develop a habit for this thing because if you do it once, it's like kind of like a print ad. Like it's not going to do anything for you. Like you can try it, but you're not going to get any good data from it. So kind of trying to get into this a little bit of a longer term mindset. I remember when I was like in the early years of my business, it seemed like I was always trying to bring revenue in for like, I need to pay the bills by the end of the month. I have 2 weeks to bring money in. I have 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
to bring money in. And that mindset lasted for a long time in my business because I could just never wrap my head around planning further in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And, eventually I found ways that worked for me to do that. But that mentality is really toxic and really easy to get caught up in and really hard to kind of just be able to step back and be like, okay, what if I can figure out a short-term solution or just accept the fact that the money's not going to be there in 2 weeks and I can start looking 3 months ahead,
Yeah. Be
like
proactive.
exactly. And just kind of change this narrative and change up this pattern because I'm obviously recreating this.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But do you find that there's a difference when you look at bigger companies that are, having employees and when you look at smaller entrepreneurs, whether people are employees or whether they have their own business, like do you find that it's I think I'm after confirmation here. But do you find that a lot of people have a hard time juggling work and personal life and make it all come together? You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, yes. And
Mm.
I think this is a really interesting thing because I work with a lot of people who are desperate to leave their corporate job in order to start a business full time.
Mm-hmm.
So either they've started a business and they just want to work on it full time, or they haven't started it yet and they wish they could be free of their corporate job in order to, have the time to focus.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I found to be true over and over again is the person who doesn't quit their corporate job and grows their business to a sustainable level before they quit generally gets there faster and with less aggro than the person who's like, I just can't take it and they quit.
Yeah.
And then they suddenly have 8 hours a day that they don't know what to do with. And
Mm-hmm.
like the pressure is gone. And now they have this financial pressure, which
Yeah.
like sucks the creativity out of them.
Uh-huh.
And they panic and they shut down and nothing happens.
Yeah.
So, one side of your question is that I actually find having less time makes us more productive.
Interesting.
Um, And so it's much more about managing the worst case scenario. So for people whose worst case scenario is not having financial security,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like, keep the job. For people whose worst case scenario is I can't take another day at this job, it's like making me physically sick, you quit the job.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But the other side of it is that I think when you're there's actually a lot of advantages that entrepreneurs have that they don't realize that they have.
Hmm.
And the reality is when you work for a corporation, they make the rules and a lot of the rules really suck.
Mm-hmm.
About things like vacation and work hours, and there's a commute and all those things. And I think the sad fact for most of us entrepreneurs is that most of us don't enjoy the freedoms that we have
No.
because of that not enoughness thing again. Like, I've got to work
Yep.
harder, I've got to work longer, I've got to be busy all the time to prove that I'm working my ass off. Like, so, like,
My gosh, the irony in that. The irony.
right? Like, think about the corporate person who's at work 9 to 5. Like, they get weekends.
Yeah.
They take weekends. They
Yeah.
have bank holidays and vacation. And the
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur, meanwhile, is working like 14-hour days every day, no breaks, no holidays. Like, and that is a choice.
Yeah.
That's a choice we make. We make that choice. And it's not because we're more productive or because we need the money, because you are much more productive in less time
Mm-hmm.
when you give yourself this, the time and the self-care and all that kind of stuff. It ties back into that not enoughness thing and us feeling like, hustling is the only way to prove that we're doing it like really hard and, glory in the busy and all of that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So ultimately, I think that like work-life balance is down to the individual, but really it doesn't matter whether you're self-employed or you work for someone else. It's kind of in the stories you tell yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
you can work yourself to death for a corporation or for your own business and end up with the same result. It's
Sure.
about making the choice that you want to enjoy the time that you've got.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, let's end with a Porla and Pine question that ties into all of this. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
What is inner peace and joyful living for you, and when do you experience it?
Ooh. Um, Inner peace. Yeah, this ties into all this research I've been doing. So my immediate response is to answer with a question an answer that comes from my head.
Mm-hmm.
But what my heart is saying is just being at the beach. I It's really hard for me to be in a non-natural state when I'm by the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's sunshine, all the better.
Of course.
So that when I need a hit of inner peace, I'm straight to the beach if I can get there. I've usually lived pretty close. And joyful living, I think, is this idea of figuring out what that is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning what makes me happy because I've spent a long time being that really stereotypical entrepreneur of working all the time and being miserable because that's what heroes do. And so when you do that, you really forget what actually gives you joy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the process of finding that, but I am discovering, unfortunately, that so much of it comes down to this idea of figuring out this whole self-worth thing and how to actually be okay with yourself exactly how you are. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's a journey that it's not something you really figure out overnight, but I've found a lot of joy in actually just allowing myself to explore that
Mm-hmm.
and make it a priority. So I guess the summary of that question is the joy for me is in the simple things that I allow myself to enjoy that maybe 3 months ago I wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of the journey and being I'm letting myself take a bath and not feel guilty about it. Makes me feel really good. And so does the bath and the cooking and the riding horses and playing games, like that simple stuff that you kind of can only enjoy if you allow yourself to. So it's that allowing.
Well, you just did a perfect ending here, I think, and summarized it beautifully.
Well, good. good.
It's been so wonderful to have you and to talk about this with you. I knew that you would have some great thoughts that I hope will be helpful for the listeners. And I know that I'm going to re-listen to this and, remind myself again. And thank you so much again, Nichole, for taking your time to do this with me.
Absolutely. I am so, so excited to see how Porla and Pine evolve. So it's really fun to be a part of it.
Yay. Well, now, where can people who are interested in finding out more about you? I'm certainly interested in that book that you were mentioning. But where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is jnicholesmith.com, and that's Nichole. The Nicole has an H in it. And it's the same on Instagram at J Nichole Smith. And if you're interested in learning about the pet side of my business, I'm at Working with Dog or workingwithdog.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. It was a pleasure. And I hope you will go and take a bath now.
Play with puppy, walk by the sea, make food,
Right?
glass of wine.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Helen.
Thank you. And that was it for today. Always remember, you are enough.